Hello to everybody, my name is Stefano and welcome to this episode of the Think and Analyze podcast. So today we are going to talk about manifest versus latent functions. Now, what are manifest and latent functions? Well, basically, manifest functions are the reasons and the consequences of something that are explicitly told by society, by people generally speaking, and are explicitly recognized, we could say. Instead, latent functions are those reasons and consequences of something that are not explicitly told. Instead, they are something implicit that on the first impact, you can't really point at them or recognize them, but on a deeper analysis, you can see them and you can actually recognize them. So we could say that manifest functions are the explicit reasons and consequences of something, whereas the latent functions are the implicit reasons and consequences of something. So a basic example, in activities which have a specific manifest function, meeting people might be a latent function. So for example, school. The manifest function of school is of course to educate you, but a latent function is also that you end up meeting people, creating bond, creating sort of a group of friends, and the same goes for work. The manifest function of work, of course, is to work, to have a job, to earn money. But also in this case, a latent function is that you end up meeting people. And the same goes for sport or also theater events, we could say. The manifest function of theater events is, of course, to attend an event, sort of manifestation. But a latent function is that you could also meet new people, find a work in that environment because you met someone, and those kind of things. Another example, and this might be a little more deep, I don't know, a little less obvious. That's what I want to say. That the manifest function of clothing is, of course, to cover your body, because basically you can't walk naked in public, and also it maintains you warm if the temperature outside is cold. However, a latent function of clothing is to reflect your style, perhaps your attractiveness, and your status. Sorry. And so you have this. You have to keep that in mind. Also, and this, when I was preparing this episode, I sort of came up with this example, and that's quite interesting. If you're talking with a stranger in a specific situation, and you show them that you also know other people in that context, I guess there's no manifest function, but a latent function is that showing that you know people makes you gain, in the eyes of the person, of the stranger, a little bit of social status, or generally approval, because you're seen as someone who might have experience in that field, in that context you are interacting. So in that case, I guess there's no manifest function other than generally socialize. But a latent function is the one I just told you. So why is it important to distinguish between manifest and latent functions? Basically because you want to be able to deeply analyze phenomena around you. You want to be able to understand what are the untold causes and consequences of something, so that you get a better understanding of the world. And as a consequence, you will not only know how to move and act in order to reach your goals more efficiently, but also how to help other people in doing so. As a matter of fact, if you basically believe and take into consideration only what is sort of explicitly told you by society, you are basically naive, because you can't actually think with sorry think on your own, and you can't sort of analyze problems or situations in order to see what are the also what are also the latent functions of something. And I say that if you don't know, if you can't recognize latent functions, you are naive, because I believe that most of the time, if you are not able to understand the hidden dynamics, the hidden consequences of something, people will basically trick you. They will say something, and so you will explicitly believe them. However, their implicit intention, you can't recognize them because you are naive, and so you will end up believing what they say, maybe doing what they explicitly told you to do, but as a consequence, they will be as a consequence, and while doing so, they will be basically tricking you so that they reach their goals in a shady way, basically, but they end up reaching their goals at your expenses. So that's why you want to always to sort of be aware that implicit things, in generally speaking, exist, and so you want to have to keep an eye on that, to pay attention to that. Whenever something, in my opinion, whenever something seems too good to be true, there's always something hidden that you need to think about and try to analyze, so that you are in the end you actually are able to understand what is implicitly going on, what hidden things are going on. So with this, where this concept of explicit versus implicit things leads, in my opinion, is that sometimes this is a situation in which, this is a situation which I believe is very sort of important. So, of course, this concept of explicit versus implicit things does not lead only to this, but in my opinion, this was the most important. Sometimes people cannot explicitly do something because it would be considered wrong to an external observer, to society. But they can act in a certain way so that another person who can do that specific thing can do it. And you want to be able to grasp that implicit chance you have. And I'm going to make an example, which is basically something I really noticed, like 1 year ago, maybe 1 year, 1.5 years ago, and that was something that really caught my eye, because I had never realized this before, and after I had realized it, I was like, damn, that person was really clever. And so, what is this thing that made me realize this? Well, basically, when I was in high school, which was basically until like 4 or 5 months ago, my teacher, my teacher used to implicitly help students during an oral test, while giving the explicit impression, that they were getting a little upset. So, what would happen? Basically, if a student was caught unprepared for the oral test, and it was obvious that the student was actually sad about the situation uh, he was in, because of course, if the student didn't really care about the oral test, the teacher, and it was obvious that he didn't care, the teacher would have ended up giving a bad mark to the student, partially also because um, the student might maybe respond unpolitely to the teacher and those kind of things. But if it was pretty obvious that the student was sad about the situation and he was almost disappointed about themselves because they knew that they could have studied more, the teacher ended up doing something that initially I really sort of that initially annoyed me because of the explicit thing that was going on. But after some time, as I said, I really understood what was actually happening. So, if, for example, my teacher asked the student, for example, in what period something had happened, and the student didn't know that, my teacher faked getting upset, a little upset, not anything exaggerated, faked like being disappointed, and while faking this behavior, in my opinion, they was faking it. They were faking it. Sorry. So I believe that my teacher did that consciously, but I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever be able to ask them. But anyway, while faking this behavior of getting a little upset or disappointed, my teacher ended up like talking to the classes and making a little jokes here and there about the student that was doing the oral test. Everything was light-hearted anyway. I don't want to like give wrong impressions. Everything was light-hearted. It was like pretty chill as a situation. But in doing so, my teacher ended up doing two implicit things. First first of all, they gave the student the time to, in some way, be able to answer the question. Maybe, basically, I'm not afraid to say that the student had maybe the chance to ask someone near him to give him like some sort of hint and those kind of things. And also, as a second implicit thing that was going on, while like getting a little upset, they made jokes which had sort of which had the answer to the question they asked. Not in the sense that they gave the clear answer to the question, but they sort of gave options that the student had to choose in order to say the answer. So the teacher asked something the student didn't know. The teacher, while faking getting upset, gave sort of two options to choose, and that was much more at that point. It was much more easier. Much easier for the student to answer because many times, not always, but many times, one of the two options was like clearly wrong and the other was explicitly, was obviously correct. Or even if they were sort of similar options and so it wasn't so obvious what was wrong and right, still it was easier for the student to be able to make something like give an answer. Maybe by doing that, maybe the student in some way remembered that thing because they had the input by the teacher, by which who gave the student the two options, and so the student in the end ended up answering correctly the answer. Now, it's not that this always happened, but many times, in my opinion, it happened. And I was, after some time of having realized it, I was like surprised that many of my classmates sort of were annoyed by the teacher getting a little upset, while I, and also some of my friends, were clearly aware that the teacher was simply almost, yeah, was faking the fact that they were getting upset in order to help the student. And the teacher had to do that, basically. The teacher, my friends who weren't aware of what was actually happening, in my opinion, well, I don't know if they were actually aware or not, but I guess not. My friends were like a little upset because they said they they used they used to say things like, why couldn't the teacher give me the right answer right away instead of making all of that scene? But the teacher had to do that because if they actually helped the student explicitly on a sort of bureaucratical, I guess you can say that, level, of course they were basically helping the student, and that was not correct because if they help one student, they should help all of the students, and that wasn't possible, of course. And also, it was difficult to measure how much you should help someone and all those kind of things. And also, if they helped explicitly, in my opinion, this happens. In my opinion, the students would have ended up believing that the teacher was really easy to trick, because because in my opinion, the students would have sort of studied less because they knew that the teacher in the end would have gave them the answer. And so, and also, yeah, the teacher basically, if they helped the student explicitly, they would have lost credibility. They would have lost respect, in my opinion, because they basically uh, they would have basically done something which was very submissive to the student. What happened instead was that while some students really didn't really grasp what was going on, in my opinion, for example, I use myself as an example because, of course, I have the most experience with myself. Like in that situation, I realized what was going on, and so I really was able to not get annoyed if I was during the oral test, not get annoyed by my teacher's behavior, but instead I sort of used that chance in order to answer as correctly as possible. And so in the end, and this like happened like many times in my opinion. In the end, I would I would get a sort of a good mark because instead of getting annoyed by the teacher, I would actually think, um, use as many ints as the teacher was giving me, and so I ended up giving the right answer. While other people might simply didn't actually uh, understand what was going on, and so they ended up getting annoyed and responding unpolitely, and all those kind of things, and so they ended up getting a bad mark. And so, and also, this is really key. What happened instead? So, by the teacher doing that, um, the teacher wasn't actually explicitly helping anyone. So, um, in that regard, the everything was going perfectly. But at the same time, they were helping the student, so that the student might get a better grade. So, in my opinion, the teacher faked to be sort of against the student, so that on a external level they were simply doing their job, but on a deeper level they were actually helping the student, and that was really something that I was happy about, because at first I thought that this teacher was simply trying uh, to put into difficulty, I guess you can say that, the student, while after some time I realized actually they were doing the opposite. So this was an example, but generally speaking, being aware of the possible existence of implicit things makes you aware that your perspective on something could be wrong. If you are stuck in a situation, you are aware that you might need to look for implicit things in order to be able to fix your problem. So I gave you an example of an actual example, a tangible example of how implicit things might happen. And I believe that with this example, you have sort of this is a sort of a proof that implicit things go on. I guess you can say that implicit things exist, and so I hope that by listening to this episode, from now on, you will be much more aware of these things, and you will be much more able to move in your reality and reaching your goal, doing what you want, in generally speaking, as efficiently as possible. So with that said, see you guys.